Oh, yes. Well, that's the most quoted line in my book on the Catskills is that when you come to where there's two stones to every dirt, then you're in the Catskills. But I've heard that in in Connecticut, said by natives of Connecticut, and I found it other places. A friend of mine who was born in Brown County, Indiana, said she remembered it being said when she was a girl in Indiana. So it's like so many folk sayings. They're almost universal. And there are other sayings that I found here and checked up and found that they were not unique. I don't think any of these things are. It's a common bond of human beings. It's this kind of almost light-hearted approach to the ills of life. You know? Yeah. These things about death and taxes, which Benjamin Franklin originated, and other things that deal with serious calamities of life in a light-hearted way. Yeah. But the Indians think the same of theirs in discussing negotiating with Indians. Good remark.
Yeah. Is this your wood pile over?
Yeah, I cut those trees out last fall. A few trees said there was too much shade and the hemlocks were suffering. And so I don't use a chainsaw anymore. I've been commanded not to, my friends and relatives. I've used them since they were invented and never had any trouble. I think it is time I stopped, so I did. But my son did the chainsawing in the beginning, and I'm doing the rest. And I burned that wood. That's how I heat part of my house.
What year were you born now?
1905. This tree straight ahead it's a tulip tree. When you look at the top, you can see the flowers. This is the first year that I've seen flowers. I think there were a few year before last, but I'm not sure. I didn't look at it in time, but they're there now. Wonderful tree.
Yeah.
That was a sapling about the thickness of this stick when I came here. But it was the only tulip tree on the place. And so I kept it, although it would block the view from up there eventually. And a deer nibbled at it, and they kept nibbling. And one year, they skipped it. And during that year, the tree got high enough so that the terminal bud was out of reach of the deer. And from that time on, it shot up.
You really have observed this place.
Yes, this is a hemlock that grows the way they do when they grow in the open. Notice the length of that branch. They're resting on the ground, the branch. And they're extraordinary tree. They're very, very beautiful. They sway in the wind in their own rhythm, and they adapt themselves to wherever they are. This one side of this, it kind of sweeps right down, and the other side has nothing down below, you see, because it's shaded. And this is the other thing that's very prominent here is witch hazel. That submits to pruning too. And there, you see, there are the witch hazel seed receptacles. It blooms in the late fall and early winter. It's the only tree or bush that does in this latitude. And if you, at the same time, the seeds are ripening. The flowers bloom just as the seeds are becoming ripe with the previous year. And if you take a branch of witch hazel into the house where it's dry, in a few days you'll hear little pings as the little globular witch hazel seeds, black, the shiny black, are released from the capsules as they dry, and they're shot maybe 15 feet away, hit a window pane or something with a sound that you can hear. I give a swig of it to people who come here and say, watch this.
Well, is that why it's called witch hazel? Because it does...
No, I'm not sure. Witch has other meanings, and I don't think it's anything to do with witch.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know, I can't remember. There's a witch elm in England, you know, W-Y-C-H, as well as witch hazel, which is a little different from this. But I like it, and it has one great advantage, and that is the deer don't like it. It's the tree from which the witch hazel lotion is made, from the bark and the roots. Particularly in Clinton, Connecticut, is the Dickinson witch hazel factory, which is the big old one. That's still, I think, in business, belongs to the same family. And people in that part of Connecticut who have woods can sell witch hazel to the farm, to the witch hazel distillery. It's a source of income for a lot of people. There's a lot of it in the labyrinth. So let's go up this path to the right first.
Okay.
Fence.
Did Harry get water from
Well, one time there was water, but there's a spring across the wall. I tried to find a better spring here, but I couldn't. You notice the laurel here on the right. It's a long line of laurel. And that was mostly here when I came here, but I filled in here and there with bushes from elsewhere. And on this side, there's ironwood, carpinus, and ossuary. The other one is called ironwood. You see, they're very interesting trees in the roughness of the bark, like a tense arm muscle. And they tend to grow in like that Y-shaped one up there. And I took out all the other woody plants here. And just saved the wood table. So there is a line of, I'm going to save the carpinus, the ironwood. So there's a line of ironwood going up. In the winter, it's very conspicuous. In the summer, not. That's witch hazel, a very conspicuous witch hazel. It's grown pretty thick. Landowners in the neighborhood on this hillside to agree together to allow him to survey the place into little plots, and they would sell them. And this road was to give access to it. And there are little piles of stones here and there that were to mark the boundaries. Well, his brother, this was a man named Ralph, his brother Craig, said to him, Ralph, who will ever buy those little bits of land up there among the rocks? And Ralph said, well, Craig, artists, of course. They didn't sell a single lot. And the plans for this place are in the county clerk's office as a blueprint showing all the little lots. And it's all gone back into one piece of property now. But it's been through a great deal. First as plowed fields actually was. They skipped the rocks in many places. It's hard to see how they could. They did grow crops here and finally pasture. This was quite pink many years. This year it's almost pure white. Very little pink. And this area, after the deer ate all my wildflowers that I spoke of a little while ago, the violets and the trillium exterminated them virtually. And they eat them when they're in bloom. And there are many other wildflowers that met the same fate. So I experimented with planting things they wouldn't eat, and I planted the daffodils. They're all up among the rocks. See, there's some of the leaves now, and they're magnificent in spring. They bloom terrifically. I had almost no sleep last night. I have periods when I work best at night. I'm full of ideas and energy. And last night was one of them. Well, this is the beginning of the labyrinth, and over the years I moved a rock or two a day and linked the big rocks, which are the remains of a glacial moraine that have been here, these rocks, in the position that they're in for about 10,000 years. And I felt a sense of cooperating with whatever force put them there in the beginning as I did the labyrinth. I made that thing to indicate that it was at the entrance. When you get to turns in the labyrinth, you make your choice whether you go right or left. This is one point. If you take this way, it gets quite complicated. And you're quite a while getting out, but we can go the direct way, so we won't spend too much time.
Do you make that choice on purpose sometimes to go the complicated route?
Yeah, yeah, oh yes, yes, yeah. I do with children, they like it,
Okay.
yeah. But I made steps in it like these, and I planted ferns, see them, the evergreen ferns. The deer eat the don't eat the rock polypody very often, that's the low ferns there. But some of the others they eat. They have quite a cluster of ferns down here, and they ate most of them. This was done by a friend of mine, a photographer who spent some hours up here one day. And he didn't say anything about this after he left. First time I came back there it was. And I was very pleased with it. And then some boys who were rather destructive came here and smoked pot in a little cabin and messed it up terribly. And they knocked this over. And so I spoke to them afterwards, and the next time I came through here, they reconstructed it just as it had been. I told you that last time. This is in here there's the last stand of the violets on this place was the Viola mollis, the only fragrant North American violet. It's a very small white violet. It's a very, very sweet odor, but it's not like the violets of commerce, the purple violets that we're used to. It's a totally distinctive odor. But the deer are as fond of it as I am, and it was a lot of it up here, big patch. And the last stand has been in here. There's still a few plants. And there's laurel there, which I planted, you see it. But the ferns mask it now. But the deer eat the new leaves, these. And so they keep heading it back, and it dies. It gets discouraged, and that's it.
How many years did it take to get this in the state that it's in?
I suppose it was about 12 years. But I did something every day. It was part of my daily routine, you see. Mm-hmm. Not much any day. Occasionally I did, yes. And Mary helped me occasionally moving the rock. This was one of my hard ones to move, this rock. I wanted to have a path down here, and this rock was just refused to stay put up there. Just as I'd get it up with great effort, it's very heavier than it looked. It would roll down again. But eventually I did it. And this little area had ground pine, lycopodiums. There were several, and I transplanted others. So this was a little collection of lycopodium, and they're all gone now. The deer don't like them, but they grab them with their teeth and they pull them up, and then they go about 2 feet with it, and then they drop them. So they exterminated it. I love the deer, but here are the Jack in the Pulpit, young ones. Very interesting plant. You know, it changes its sex depending on its physical constitution. When it's very heavy, when it's very healthy and vigorous, it becomes a female, and when it doesn't feel so well, it's a male.
Quite a commentary.
It is. But it's very acrid to taste, particularly the bulb, and the deer don't eat it. They're aware of that. But occasionally the wild turkeys, which are getting fairly common here, pull up the Jack in the Pulpit and nibble at the roots, but they don't get very far. They just kill the plant.
Mm.
But they're not that common, and the Jack in the Pulpit is holding its own. I moved these evergreen ferns in here, so I have a fair amount of green. Developed variety is developed. One day I came here and there was a deer sitting here, sleeping. Jumped over that wall.
I think just woke them up. Huh?
I dug this out quite a bit because I wanted to have a lower spot. Now, the water comes out from under there much of the year, but not all. Well, we've gone off the main trail. And I'll guide us back again. There's another road. There's a bit of confusion up here. But we'll take it this way. But I'm not usually have much trouble with my legs, but I do today. I have arthritis, you know, like everybody my age does. Yeah, we'll go back the way we came. We could have gone around several other ways, but I don't want to take your time. This old red maple is dying, but it sheds a limb every once in a while, but there's still a little life in it. The oldest tree in this little area. And here's a laurel that is not taken kindly to growth of these hemlocks. And it's just thin out a little bit here. It might come back. That used to bloom every year. This is one great rock that split a long time ago. And that was once, years ago, 1960s, some of my grandchildren who lived in Geneva in Switzerland were here, and they had a great project here. They roofed this over with logs and brush and so forth, so there's real little room there. When they came back 15 years later, they dashed up to look at it. It was gone. Of course, it rotted out at that time. And I'd incorporated it in this. They're good examples of the local bedrock, bluestone, sandstone. See where it's very, very thin layers in many places, and others it's thicker.
There was a big article on the return of bluestone to fashion in New York City.
Oh, yeah? Now, this is the top. This is the goal. Where you can look out. You've been enclosed up to this point, and when you get here, you can look out at the world. Yeah. And I put this branch, it was a branch of this tree that fell, and I roped it up there. And the rope was rotted out and it stays there, but that was to represent the dead tree of Salvatore Rosa and Thomas Cole.
I was going to say.
Mandatory in the foreground.
You.
So people without any prompting have looked and they say, oh, this is a Hudson River School landscape.
It's kind of interesting to actually construct the landscape. You kind of wonder if Cole did that in some, I mean, I know he would do it on canvas, but you kind of wonder if he did any of this sort of engineering.
Certain
I don't think he did, but he certainly shifted it on canvas.
Mm-hmm.
There's a man at the University of Delaware who used to come up once in a while who was working on a paper about it. I never saw it. I don't know whether he finished it, but he had photographs of all Cole's paintings of Catskills Falls and so forth, and he worked out the way a rock had been moved 12 feet to the left and something else had gone up in the air 30 feet and so on. It was considerable changing. I don't know, I think we all knew that long ago, but anybody who's painted knows those things.
Well, art historians have to.
Yes. Well, I have to clip all the time. I did this year about a month ago here because branches of trees, all vegetation, is struggling to get as much light as possible at all costs. It'll kill its neighboring plants in order to get sunlight. And these trees are the same way. They're determined to fill this in and deprive me of the view. And so I come here with one of those long-handled pruners and clip a bit every year, keep it open.
Was the Catskill romance so inevitable that even without Thomas Cole and Frederick Church and Washington Irving, it still would have developed the way it did, or would?
Well, it was, you know, the European Romanticism. There were painters in England, the 18th century landscape painters who were heading that way, treated of landscape. Some like Gainsborough, whose trees, as someone said, looked like fried parsley. He didn't, but there were others. Wilson, good many. No, it was part of the growth of romantic feeling. Cole was an Englishman. There was a piece in last Sunday's Times. I haven't read it. I still have it, on Thomas Cole as an Englishman, which is what I've maintained for years. He was an Englishman who was determined to become an American, and he when he was in England, he had very little to do with English painters. He exhibited, but he didn't speak with approval of British painters at the time, and they didn't give him the approval that he expected. And it's curious, we went back to his home country, and I went to his birthplace, you know, a few years ago, where he was unknown. I think I told you last time I saw you that, well, I would spend a day in Bolton-le-Moor, it used to be, which is really part of Greater Manchester now. And that was his birthplace. Very interesting place, interesting background. There'd been a lot of revolutionary feeling there during the French Revolution, which helps us understand Wordsworth and Southey and the others who were in trouble over this. And but at the library, they have an excellent library and very, very good librarians. They helped me. During that day, I kept them busy, and I worked like mad too. I only had one day, and we found that nobody I met had ever heard of Thomas Cole. And in the library was a woman there who was very, very good, and she said she seemed to remember something. She didn't know what it was, and she looked, and she spent hours, and she came to me jubilant with a clipping from a local newspaper of about, I think it was in the 1930s, and a local reporter had been seen an exhibition of landscapes in London, including one by Thomas Cole, and he was described as a native of Bolton, and he had thought, amazing. I've never heard of him. He went back to Bolton, all the dog, nobody had ever heard of him. And he said, we got to do something about this. And he wrote quite an appeal, but nobody did anything. They have their principal hero is Richard Crampton, who invented the what was it called, the mule jenny or whatever it was called, in weaving. And they have a statue of him in the center of the town. And they also have an immense machine set up as a public monument, as if it were human, nearby, an early weaving machine. Interesting town, Bolton. Has a one of those mid-19th century shopping centers under many shops under one roof, a kind of crystal palace in miniature, still maintained and still full of little shops. Very fascinating place. I never heard of it, so I just stumbled on it. I needed to buy a pair of braces, they call them there.
But what's that behind you? What's that behind you?
Yeah, oh yes, well that, people used to say to me, where is your miniature? A labyrinth should have a miniature. I thought, well, a thought, so I made that out of scrap. I've done things with scrap metal, and that's the upper part, the face part, is a slide for a barn door. And he has provided here ever since, except for a brief period when I hid him behind a big rock down there. And the little girl cried when she came upon him. And so I thought, well, I don't think that's such a good idea to leave him in the open. And he's looking out at the distance. He wants to escape, but he can't. He has no feet. He has legs with no feet.
you do sacrifices and maintenance and use.
Right. Yes, yes. Well, this little hemlock grove, some died in the dry summers that we had in the mid-1960s. A few of them died, and I took them down, and they had around 125 rings, and probably more. That was as far as I could count. So it's been here a long time, and my neighbor, who was born here in this valley, his family ran the turning mill down below here. He told me that his uncle, Schaffer Vosberg, who was a wood turner and partner in the mill, was also interested in nature. I knew Schaffer when he was very old, lived to be quite an advanced age, and he used to feed the birds from his hands, and they'd sit on his head. He would pick up frogs and toads and talk to children about them, and all animals seemed to like him. He had a monkey at one time that went around on his shoulder, and this was his property here. His house was right down there, and there were several sawmills up above here, and the millers would ask him to sell him the hemlocks that we had, but he never would. And they said, "Well, come on now, Schaffer, why not? You can get money for them." He said, "I won't sell them." "Why not?" "Because the birds like them." So that endeared Schaffer to me. I'd liked him before I ever heard that, but that really sold it. There's a bit about him in a book that's coming out essays of mine, is coming out in September about Schaffer, with a picture of him at his turning bench. Well, this is the rock straight place for children. Sink here, there's a second story there, and a little floor, and they drape a waterproof piece of plastic over to keep the rain out, which they do sometimes. Not so many now. Of course, those trees that are growing there their roots are pushing the rocks. Amazing how the tree can push rocks apart. And that's what's happened. This was a big, massive rock at one time. This bit has fallen away. On the other side, there's another large mass that just pushed the side of the tree. And it's here with Boston. So it's been there for probably 10,000 years, the end of the Ice Age, when it was caught up in the ice. And one geologist said to me, thought of it, possibly slipped over the edge of a massive ice and landed this way. It wouldn't have ridden in the ice, it would more likely go horizontal. And that's how it got to be in that position.
But the other side, you can actually see the remnants of
Yeah, we'll go down this way. This part here, after the rest, so I've done a great deal of hiking. This was an area that was very much like the upper Catskills, except that it had the hemlocks, which don't grow in the highest elevation. But it reminds me of my hiking days. And I always enjoyed it. I keep it wild. I don't do anything with the plants here. I just made the path possible. Looking ahead to my old age, I made them set. This is an example of the way the bedrock of the Catskills is built up the bluestone. You notice how it plants different ways. at different times. This plants up at almost 45 degrees, and this is parallel. But these rocks will have a whole little society on top of them with plants. See here, there are 3 or 4 different kinds of ferns and a few hemlock trees. The hemlocks never get to be very old. You see that one has died, this. In the dry summer they'll die, but there's always a little society left there. On one rock that we passed a while ago, on Big Rock, there's a plant called spignut. It's an Aralia, and the root is edible. And people who are lost in the woods ate spignut root as a last resort. But that one has persisted on top of a rock bigger than this, with no obvious connection with the rest of the world around it. And the roots get down in the cracks of the rocks, and somehow it keeps enough moisture to keep all those plants going. They're transpiring water all the time and drawing it up through these crevices in the rock. One of the pleasures of this place is there's just a variety of plants like this. And when I came here, there were porcupines here under this rock. But they just disappeared. I used to, in the winter, when I walk up here, I follow the porcupine trail to the snow. They make kind of ditch. Maybe 8 inches deep in white snow. A lot of the rocks have lost their moss because children climb, but none of them climb this. And it takes a long time for it to become reestablished.
Bolton Brown has one of his fantasies when he was a child was a bed of moss in the middle of the woods, a really beautiful passage in his childhood memories. And
Yeah.
I was identified with that because, well, I guess it's a very common identification of just feeling moss and wishing you could sort of
It's
live.
very, very attractive.
Yeah.
Dogs are like it. I have a bed of moss farther down, just above those cliff hemlocks. When I go for walks with my dog on a hot day, he would always stop and lie down on the moss.
Smart dog.
Yeah. A friend of my son's and of mine who has, what's it called? I've forgotten what it is. He's, anyway, he has a chronic ailment. He's a sculptor. That gives him a lot of trouble. He gets trouble. He falls asleep suddenly and just can't irresistibly falls asleep. And then other times he can't sleep. It's a very, I've forgotten what the name of it is. That's the sort. But he spent several weeks here. He slung a hammock between these trees, and he found he could sleep here better than anywhere else. He was almost normal.